You were just filling a chair. Diane, you didn't build anything. I don't owe you a thing." The words hit like a slap across the face. And the worst part, he said it into a microphone, loud enough for the entire conference room to hear. 60 people, all watching, some turning away, some stifling smirks. A few, just a few, looked down in quiet shame. It was our quarterly company review, polished, rehearsed, and hosted in the glass-walled boardroom on the 31st floor. I had helped design that room, picked the acoustic panels myself so the sound would carry perfectly. Funny how, at that moment, I wished it wouldn't. Mark, my boss, barely 42 but cocky like he invented business itself, stood in front of the crowd. His sleeves rolled up, confidence oozing. The new CEO, freshly promoted, freshly full of himself. And I stood at the side of the stage, holding the performance report I had compiled. My name wasn't on it. He had removed it. Not even a passing thanks. Not even a nod. Just that sentence. "You didn't build anything." And people clapped. A few at first, then more. Because what else do you do in those rooms? When someone above you says something cruel, you laugh. You clap. You blend in. Only one person didn't clap. Ethan, my assistant. Young, quiet, good heart. He just looked at me, not with pity, but with restraint, like he knew something, like he was waiting. I tried to breathe normally, but my lungs felt like they'd shrunk inside my chest. The room began to spin slowly, just enough to make the edges of people's faces blur. My hands trembled, not from anger, not yet, but from the effort of keeping my dignity intact. He wasn't done. Mark gestured behind him to the projection screen and said, "And thanks to Aubrey for bringing this strategy to life. She's a rising star, real leadership potential." Aubrey, the intern, turned manager, the one who used to call me ma'am 3 months ago. She smiled and waved as if accepting an award at the Oscars. She was wearing my idea, I mean that literally, that flowchart he just bragged about. That was mine, the one I sketched on the back of a takeout menu after working late last quarter. I still had the original in my drawer, but now it belonged to her, to them. The applause swelled again, louder this time, and I felt something inside me shift, not break, not yet, just shift, like a quiet, slow unlocking. Mark smirked as he looked over at me, hand still gripping the mic. "Diane, would you like to say a few words before you go? This is your last official appearance with us." There it was, the final blow. He had fired me. Right there. In public. Dressed it up like a goodbye. Didn't even have the decency to tell me first. I looked at the room, at the polished glass, the LED lights, the recycled air, the people who once depended on me, now nodding like he had done something brave. I swallowed once, then twice. I walked slowly to the mic, not because I had anything to say, but because I needed to feel my legs under me, to prove I could still stand, still walk. And then, without a word, I bent down, picked up my bag calmly, and as I turned to leave, a small silver USB drive slipped from my folder and landed near Mark's feet. He didn't notice, but Ethan did. We locked eyes, and I saw it. That flicker, like a spark at the start of a fire. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just whispered to myself as I walked past the glass doors. All right, noted. Outside the boardroom. The hallway was silent, carpeted, clinical. I could hear my own footsteps like echoes in my head. I didn't go to my office. I didn't clean out my desk. I didn't even take the elevator down. Instead, I walked into the stairwell because I needed to breathe. I needed the echo of something real. My hand clenched the railing so tightly it left marks in my palm, but I didn't cry. Not yet, because something had cracked wide open, And it wasn't me. It was the illusion. The illusion that loyalty meant something. The illusion that the long nights and early mornings had ever mattered. The illusion that, just because you built the foundation, you'd get to live in the house. He'd humiliated me on purpose. Not because I was incompetent, but because I knew too much. Because I had built too much. Because the only way he could feel taller was by stepping on the woman who taught him how to climb. And now he thought I was gone. Just like that. He thought he had erased me, but he didn't know what I knew. He didn't know what I had kept. He didn't know that every quarterly report, every acquisition proposal, every funding round had run through me. Not just on paper, not just as support, but in my hands, my voice, my signature. He didn't know I had a copy of the original shareholder restructuring plan, the one his father had signed 5 years ago. He didn't know that plan had my name on it. He didn't know I still had my shares, 60.4%. He thought I was just operations. He didn't know I was the spine of the company, and I wasn't going to raise my voice. I wasn't going to make a scene, because women like me, we don't explode. We detonate quietly, precisely, and always with perfect timing. I stood in that stairwell for exactly 7 minutes. Then I opened my phone, scrolled to a contact I hadn't touched in years, Gregory M., legal counsel, private, the man who handled my late husband's estate. I typed just 4 words. I'm ready. Let's begin. I hit send, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled, because Mark thought the game was over. But he had no idea. The real game was only just beginning. When I first walked into that office 24 years ago, it smelled like ambition. Coffee, printer ink, floor wax, and something electric in the air like possibility. I wasn't wearing heels back then, just worn-out flats and a skirt that didn't quite fit. I had a resume nobody read, and a voice I was still learning to use. But I had one thing no one could take from me: work ethic. That company was still young. Just a few rooms above a warehouse, no cafeteria, no receptionist, not even air conditioning that worked half the time. And yet, I loved it. I gave it everything. I stayed late when no one asked, learned QuickBooks on weekends, talked down angry vendors, and closed deals in my secondhand blazer like I was born for it. And then came Michael, the CEO's rising star, young, loud, charming, the kind of man who shook your hand too hard and never remembered your name. Except he remembered mine. At first, we worked well together. He had big ideas, I knew how to make them real. I cleaned up his budgets, rewrote his proposals, and saved 3 major clients from walking all before lunch some days. Michael would clap me on the back, wink, and say, "Couldn't have done it without you." But it always ended the same way: his name on the slide deck, mine in the footnotes. Still, I stayed. Because I believed in the mission, because I thought hard work would speak for itself. And maybe because I still thought he'd see me. He saw me. All right. He saw how dependable I was, how quiet, how easy it was to lean on me without giving credit. He started sending junior staff to my meetings, told me to help in the background while he did the talking. It stung. But I told myself it was temporary, that I'd earned my place. Until the pitch meeting with Langford & Co. It was the biggest deal of the year. I spent 3 weeks building the model, forecasting outcomes, crafting every word. I barely slept. The night before the meeting, Michael stopped by my desk. Eyes bright, he said. "Don't bother showing up tomorrow. We don't want to confuse the messaging. I've got it." Just like that. No explanation, no apology. Just dismissed. I sat there, blinking at my screen, trying to understand. The next day, I watched the live stream from my office. I heard my numbers, my language, my vision, and I heard the room applaud for Michael. I didn't cry. Not then. I just wrote his exact phrases down in a notebook, because somewhere deep down, Something shifted, even then. I didn't walk away. I stayed when they moved me to a different office far from the main floor. I stayed when my name disappeared from monthly updates. I stayed when HR skipped over me for the leadership summit in favor of a man I trained. And still, I smiled. I mentored interns, took notes, showed up early with coffee for a team that no longer looked me in the eye. But I started keeping everything. I archived emails, saved original drafts, noted every instance where my voice was muted, my work rebranded, because the silence that once broke my heart became my power. And then came the moment I knew. The company restructured. Leadership was being reviewed. Michael got promoted. And the first thing he did was schedule a private meeting. He smiled like nothing had happened, said, "You've done well, but we're heading in a younger, more dynamic direction. You'll be fine." And just like that, he ended 24 years with a handshake and a smile. But I didn't flinch. I stood up, gathered my things, and said, "All right, noted." Then I walked out, calm, measured. Because what Michael didn't know, what no one in that building had ever thought to ask, was who actually owned the company. You see, I wasn't just an employee, not after the 5th year. When the company hit its first profit milestone and the founder, old Mr. Carlisle, offered me a slice of equity in lieu of a bonus. "You've got the sharpest eye in this room," he told me. "I want someone with skin in the game watching the books." Back then, nobody wanted stock. They wanted cash. But I saw what this company could become, so I said yes. And every year after that, I bought more, quietly, patiently. Sometimes in small amounts, sometimes through odd timing, like when a partner divorced and wanted out. I kept my name off the radar. Spread ownership across trusts, small firms, all legal, all clean. By year 15, I owned 27%. By the time Michael got promoted, I owned 60.4%, but I never said a word, because I needed him to show me exactly who he was in public, in front of witnesses, and he did. He belittled me in meetings, called me old school during team calls. Once, when a younger exec mentioned my name in praise, he laughed and said, "Clara, she's a glorified accountant. Let's not pretend she moved mountains." I was in the hallway. I heard every word. Even then, I didn't storm in, didn't raise my voice. I just smiled to myself and marked the date. Because I knew his arrogance was building the case for me. I had my records, I had timelines, I had signatures, and I had a plan. There was one more person who helped without even knowing it. Grace. She was Michael's new assistant, fresh out of college. Smart as a whip. People underestimated her because she wore cardigans and said "sir" too often. But I saw her stay late. Saw the way she tilted her screen when Michael barked at her. But didn't notice me walking past. One evening, she found me in the break room, quietly poured herself tea, and whispered, "Just so you know, they're using your budget slides again for the investor meeting." He renamed the folder to Michael's Final. She didn't have to tell me, but she did. And that changed everything. That night, I went home, pulled out my black folder, the one with every document I'd been saving for 15 years, and I made a new section. Final moves. From that moment on, everything became deliberate. When I offered to step away quietly, it was to see if he'd put it in writing. When I was asked to sign an NDA for severance, I pretended to hesitate. Just long enough for them to email me the terms. They thought they were dismissing me with class. But really, they were signing their own stage directions, and I wasn't done yet. I called my attorney, the same woman who'd helped me structure my holdings for years. I told her, "It's time." She didn't ask what I meant. She just said, "I've been waiting for this call together." We drafted the documents, scheduled the board review, and selected one very specific meeting for the reveal the annual shareholders presentation. The same one Michael would be opening as the new face of the company. I even RSVP'd, polite, quiet, with a smiley face in the email, and the very last line I wrote. Looking forward to seeing how you present the future, because that future didn't belong to him, not anymore. It happened on a Thursday, not just any Thursday, one of those cold, fluorescent lit afternoons where everything feels a little too still. The room was packed. We were gathered in the main conference hall, the same one where I'd spent years building our quarterly reviews, training new execs, walking nervous clients through their doubts. And now, I was just another face in the crowd, no longer invited to speak, no longer even acknowledged. Paul stood at the front, polished and loud. His voice boomed over the mic like he owned the air. "As you all know," he said, eyes sweeping the room like a spotlight. "We've been restructuring, tightening up loose ends, and then..." He looked directly at me, held it for just long enough. Sometimes, leadership gets sentimental, holds on to people out of loyalty, not results. But this company needs clarity. That's why I made the call to move forward without Clara. A few gasps, a few awkward coughs, and then silence. The kind that rings, I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe, for a second, because he had said it like I was a failed experiment, a mistake that needed erasing, in front of the interns I once mentored, in front of the managers who used to line up for my feedback. I felt erased. My hands were folded in my lap, but they trembled. I thought of getting up, walking out, but I couldn't move my legs. They were heavy, like shame had settled in my bones. The presentation continued. He brought up charts, bar graphs, trends I had forecasted 6 months ago, still using my models, still stealing my work, but now giving credit to Aubrey, the new rising star. She sat to the side, nodding politely. Perfectly made up, perfectly silent. I couldn't look at her, couldn't look at anyone. My mind drifted to my daughter, just the night before. She had asked if I was still the boss, and I had lied. I said, of course. Now here I was, being unmade, publicly, like I'd never mattered. At break, I locked myself in the far restroom stall and pressed my palms against the tiled walls. My chest felt like it was folding in on itself. I had given everything to that place, and somehow they had rewritten the story without me in it. Maybe I should have walked away right then. But then my phone buzzed. A message. From Linda. Quiet. Shy Linda from accounting. It said only, "I saw what he did. You weren't wrong." That's all, but something about it cracked the fog. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't crazy. And slowly, the heaviness lifted. Not completely, but enough. I stepped out of that stall with a strange kind of stillness. Not angry, not broken, just done waiting. I didn't storm back into the room. I didn't cause a scene. Instead, I walked past the catering trays, the scattered folders, the fake smiles, and sat in the back row. I watched, and I listened. Paul kept talking, pitching his vision. He was already acting like the CEO. Not officially yet, but everyone knew that's what he wanted. He spoke in broad strokes. But I knew those slides were mine. Each number, each forecast, was from the strategic plan I had crafted over the past fiscal year. He thought I wouldn't notice. Only later did he make the mistake that shifted the room, he said, loud and clear. "This model you see here, it's the work of our brilliant analyst, Aubrey." People clapped, hesitant claps, but I caught it. Linda turned to me just barely and whispered, "That's your format." I nodded once. It was subtle. But in that moment, I knew. I wasn't alone. And right then, I made a decision. I waited for the break. waited until the hallway had cleared, and only the faint sound of coffee being poured echoed from the kitchenette. That's when I approached Linda. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice, steady. She leaned in and whispered, "He used your files. I know because I ran the data tables, and the metadata still had your name on them. He told me not to mention it, said you were on the way out anyway." I didn't flinch. Not this time. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the quiet folder I'd kept for months. Inside it, printouts, screenshots, the full IP timeline of the files I'd created, saved, and revised, all marked, all dated, all signed with the traceable watermark I had discreetly embedded. After the first time Paul had forgotten to credit me, Linda's eyes widened. "This is airtight," she said. "You could—" I smiled just a little. "I know. The next part I kept to myself. I didn't tell her that I'd already sent a sealed envelope to the board's compliance officer. Didn't tell her the USB in my coat pocket contained the full email trail. Didn't tell her I had quietly retained legal counsel 6 weeks ago. After seeing Aubrey present one of my diagrams, with the exact typo I'd made in a rough draft, I just nodded and said, "Thank you. You don't have to do anything else." But Linda looked at me with that quiet kind of bravery that only people who've been underestimated understand. And then, she said, "I'll be there." That night, I didn't sleep, not from anxiety, but anticipation, because for the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel small. I felt ready. And when the company's annual strategy summit came just 4 days later, Paul had no idea I would show up. No idea what was coming. The room shimmered with glass and ambition. It was the quarterly shareholder summit held inside the company's grandest conference hall, where even the ceiling lights seemed to sneer in gold. Everyone who mattered was there. Board members, investors, regional managers flown in just for the event, and standing at the front of the stage, gripping the podium like it belonged to him, was Nathan. His tailored suit was perfect, his smile even more so. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice smooth as polished marble, "today marks a new chapter. With streamlined operations and our reimagined leadership, our company has never looked stronger." I sat near the back, no longer with a nameplate, no reserved seat, just me, in the second to last row, between a junior HR rep and someone I didn't recognize. And yet, my hands were steady, my eyes calm. Nathan continued, "I'd like to personally thank the executive team for their trust, and especially those who supported me during our leadership transition. It wasn't easy, but I think we all agree. It was necessary." There it was. That was the knife he slid in with a smile. Several heads turned to glance at me brief, polite flashes of awkward sympathy before looking away again. I could almost hear their thoughts. Poor woman. She had a good run. You don't mess with the new regime. But before Nathan could raise his champagne glass for a staged toast, a small voice clear and slightly shaky rose from the second row. "Excuse me. I think there's something you forgot to mention." The room froze. It was Talia. From legal. Quiet. 28 rarely spoken meetings, and always carried a yellow notepad like a security blanket. Nathan let out a short, amused exhale. "Talia, now's probably not the time." But she didn't flinch. Instead, she lifted a slim folder. "2 weeks ago, I received a copy of the original patent filing for our newest software suite. The one that's tripled our Q1 profits." She paused. "Only the names on the document, they don't match the ones on the press release." There were murmurs. Nathan's smile flickered. She kept going. "That patent belongs to someone else. Someone who was recently let go." My breath stayed even, because this wasn't the show. It was the opening act. Nathan leaned in, voice low. "Talia, that's enough," but I was already rising. The sound of my heels against the marble echoed with eerie clarity. 1, 2, 3 steps forward. Then I turned, facing the entire room, and pulled something from my coat pocket. A USB. It caught the light. Click. My voice measured, calm, and cold cut through the silence. I have here the original concept document for the software. Time-stamped, authenticated, drafted 18 months ago. I walked up to the AV technician and handed him the drive. I'd like the room to see what really happened. Nathan's jaw tensed. You can't do this. I looked at him dead center. I already did. The projector screen flickered to life. A video began playing grainy security footage from a conference room. It showed me pitching the exact software model to a room of 3 people. One of them was Nathan, his notepad open, his eyes sharp, the timestamp 16 months ago. The camera's audio clear. This isn't yours, I had said to him in that old footage, if this goes through. I want formal credit, copyright registration, and an equity review. The Nathan in the video had nodded. I promise. He said. Gasps broke out around the room. Chairs shifted. Glasses were quietly placed back on tables. The toast. Forgotten. And I wasn't done. In my other hand, another document. A sealed envelope. I placed it in front of the board chair, who had gone pale. For legal review, I said simply, then turned back to the crowd. You see, while Nathan was preparing speeches and cutting names off doors, I was updating stock registers, I was documenting communications, I was watching. I paused. And I'm still here. The room had changed. No longer golden, now gray. Heavy. Eyes shifted, whispers swirled. The board members whispering to each other now. The CEO on his phone, face flushed, one by one. The people who had looked past me started looking at me again. Nathan, meanwhile, stepped forward, panic in his voice for the first time. She's twisting this. None of it's illegal. This was approved. But someone else stood. Ronald, quiet man, senior analyst, never raised his voice. I remember that meeting. He said, I was there, and she's telling the truth. The dam had cracked, and it was only the beginning. Nathan's face twisted, part disbelief, part raw panic. Ronald, you're misremembering. That footage. It's edited. This is character assassination. But the board was no longer listening to him. They were staring at the screen, frozen on the still image of me standing at that whiteboard, pointing to a prototype flowchart they'd all come to know well. The backbone of our company's current success, my handwriting, my voice, my work. And Nathan. He was just the one who slapped his name on it. Another voice spoke up, Andrea from finance. I was told she stepped down willingly, that she was overwhelmed. But this shows you lied. Nathan's voice cracked. It was complicated. She was resistant to change. To growth, I finally turned to face him fully. You mean I questioned you? And asked for credit. That's what you call resistance. He opened his mouth, closed it. There was nothing left to say. Because the next document, the one the board chair was now holding with trembling hands, was even worse. It was the certified transfer of 60.4% stock ownership. My name, my share purchase dates, my voting rights, everything. In order, legal, logged, unshakable. I've been quiet, I said. Softer now. Because I didn't want to humiliate anyone. But when you stole my work and then tried to erase me, I let the silence finish the sentence for me. The board chair stood. She was trying to keep calm, but her hands were visibly shaking. Nathan, she said, voice clipped, please step out of the room. We'll be convening a closed session immediately. He looked stunned. You're kidding. You're kicking me out because of her. She didn't answer. Neither did anyone else. He turned to the room, searching for a single pair of eyes to meet his. But they were all looking away now. or worse, down at their phones, typing, reporting, forwarding everything they'd just seen. He took a step toward me, eyes flashing. "This isn't over." And I said the words I'd been saving. "No. Nathan, for you, it just is." Then I turned my back to him, not out of anger, not to wound, but because there was nothing left worth facing. He stormed out, alone, and the door, heavy and soundproof, shut behind him with a quiet but definitive thud. The moment lingered, still, charged. Then one of the board members, a woman I'd worked with years ago on our first ever crisis audit, stood up and crossed the room. She didn't say anything, just reached for my hand. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. And then another hand, a nod, a murmured apology. It wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, but it was powerful. The tide had turned. The people who'd once laughed, stayed silent, or played neutral, now stood in a quiet circle around me, like a wall, rebuilding itself. And all I could think deep in my chest was, "You thought I was finished. You had no idea I was the foundation, because that's what they never see, isn't it? The quiet ones, the steady hands, the people who don't bark orders or dominate rooms, just hold everything together until they're pushed too far. Until someone forces them to show exactly what they've been holding. And when that moment comes, there's no mistaking it. You just witnessed mine." The boardroom was quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the heavy, breath-holding kind. You could feel it in the air, that kind of stillness right after an earthquake. Graham had just been escorted out. No yelling, no protest, just the sound of his shoes echoing on the polished tile, and the hush that fell over everyone when the door clicked shut behind him. No one dared move. I stayed standing at the front of the room, my hands calm, my spine straight, but inside me. Years of betrayal were still trembling through my chest. Then, a voice from the far end of the table cleared its throat. It was Richard, one of the few senior partners who had always kept his distance. He looked at me, then down at his notes. I reviewed the documents again. Everything checks out. Ms. Eldon has the legal authority to override Graham's position. In fact, she always did. And just like that, the room began to stir. Chairs shifted. Eyes met. Whispers exchanged. Some faces were full of relief, others, shame. "Why didn't we know?" someone finally asked, half under their breath. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That part wasn't my responsibility. What mattered now was that the balance had shifted. And yet, I didn't move to sit down. I wasn't there for power. I wasn't even there for vengeance. I was there for something quieter, something deeper, dignity, and maybe that's why. When CEO Michael Trask walked in just moments later, flanked by 2 advisors and holding a leather folder in his hands, he didn't look at the empty chair where Graham had been sitting. He looked at me, and he nodded. "Clara," he said, "would you be willing to step into the role interim president, with full oversight?" His voice didn't shake, but his eyes searched mine carefully, like he knew this time. The answer had to come from me. I didn't say yes right away. I paused long enough for everyone to feel it. Then I smiled, softly, not triumphant, just whole. "I'll accept," I said, "but on my terms." And that was the beginning. Not of a power grab, but of a quiet reclamation. The days that followed moved like ripples from a stone tossed in still water. Graham was suspended, pending full investigation. His misuse of funds, falsified proposals, and inappropriate promotion practices. All of it unraveled fast, like a sweater pulled at the wrong thread. And the same board that had once applauded him, now? They couldn't even look me in the eye without muttering apologies? Still, I didn't humiliate him. I didn't need to. Real justice doesn't scream. It just arrives. Clients who had backed away quietly now came back, one even said. We always wondered why the company ran better when you were in charge behind the scenes. I didn't answer. I just thanked them politely, firmly, and moved forward. But the moment that stayed with me the most was a message, simple, from Amelia. One of the assistants who had once turned cold toward me when Graham rose to power. It read, "You handled it with more grace than I ever could." I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I stared at that message for a long time. Not because I needed the apology, but because it reminded me people are watching, even when you think they've written you off. The office felt different after that, lighter, more honest. And when I walked into the boardroom again this time with my nameplate at the head of the table, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel bitter. I felt still after the storm. I looked around the room, at faces that once doubted me, and I didn't need their approval anymore. I had already proven who I was, quietly, completely, and as I reached into my bag, pulled out the business card Graham had handed me years ago, the one where he wrote in red pen, "You'll never make it past mid-level," I smiled, folded it in half, and dropped it into the shredder on my way out. I still go to the same coffee shop, same old corner table, same crooked lampshade above it. The barista doesn't call me ma'am anymore, he says. "Hey, Clara," and slides my drink across the counter with a grin. Funny how the world doesn't stop when yours has, and then starts again. A little quieter, a little surer, I remember. Just days after everything unraveled in that boardroom, I sat here with my hands wrapped around this same cup. It was trembling back then. Now, it's steady. I didn't return to the office, not in the way people expected me to. The board offered me the CEO chair, unanimously, no strings attached, but I turned it down, I said. If I accept now, it's not leadership, it's retribution in disguise. They blinked, they fumbled. One of them even asked, "So what do you want?" I smiled. Time, peace, and a seat on the oversight committee to make sure this never happens again. That was enough. I gave my successor, a young, sharp woman named Talia, my full support. She had the mind, she had the fire, and above all, she had seen the worst of men and didn't flinch. On my last official day, I walked through the office for one final time. No speeches, no cake. No, "We'll miss you" banners. Just a quiet walk. Down the hallway I helped design. Past the break room where I once hand-wrote welcome notes for every intern. To the lobby where they used to put my name beside his on the wall. Only now, only my name remained. I stood in front of it, and then, slowly, quietly, I peeled the nameplate off the glass, placed it into my bag, not as a trophy, but as a reminder sometimes. The name on the wall isn't the legacy, it's the fingerprints on every hand you once held up behind the scenes. I didn't vanish. Though, a few weeks later, I started teaching, just 2 nights a week at the local business college. Ethics and Leadership, that's the name of the course. The first time I stood in front of that class, I was nervous, more nervous than I'd ever been in any board meeting. One of my students, maybe 19 or 20, looked at me with those wide, raw eyes and asked, "Have you ever been betrayed at work?" I paused. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I realized the answer wasn't the point. So I said, "Yes, and that's why I'm here." She didn't blink, just nodded slowly. And I knew right then she had felt it too. It was in that moment, that little, quiet moment, I realized something I wish I'd known sooner. Power isn't what you hold, it's what you let go of. Because healing doesn't always arrive with justice. Sometimes, it comes in the form of clarity. I stopped waking up angry. I stopped replaying that scene at the annual meeting. stopped wondering if I should have raised my voice louder, or stormed out, or sued them all. I didn't need to, because I'm still here, still standing, still breathing, and maybe just maybe a little more whole than I was before. So if you've ever been shut out, if someone told you, you don't belong at this table, you do. If they mocked your silence, they forgot that silence is just another kind of strength. If they underestimated you, let them, because power doesn't need applause. It doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs truth, and truth, darling, is quiet, but unshakable. So here's what I'll say to you, sitting with this story in your ears, if you've ever been dismissed, ignored, or told you weren't enough. This story was for you. You are not what they called you. You are who you choose to become next. You're still here. And that matters more than you know. If you felt something in this story, I'd love to hear your truth in the comments. And if you know someone who needs this quiet reminder today, share it with them. Stick around. We tell stories for the ones who've been quiet too long. And believe me, you're not alone anymore.